Okay, I think with James's opening yesterday, it was a bit obvious that this is going to be an increasing trend into the future, that there's going to be more and more research moving to on-farm. Industry want this, they want to pose and answer their own research questions. So the motivation for me being here today is talking about how you can get the most out of on-farm trialling. A lot's been happening in the past and it's going to be increasing into the future. So if you have a clearly posed research question, I guess the aim is obvious, and Richard Daniels, who isn't here, had beautiful aims up at the start of his talk yesterday. Very meticulous, very organised person with clear aims as to what he wants out of his trials. And then the conduct of your trial will follow on nicely from that. How you need to run the trial depends really on what you're trying to achieve. So the distinction I guess I like to make is, are you trying to demonstrate a principle, or are you trying to make comparisons? There's a common preference for industry to see varieties side by side in large areas, probably for very good reasons. You might be able to tell me some. You like to make observations, plant with large equipment, harvest with large equipment, just see how these things grow in large areas, as opposed to perhaps a distrust of small plot experimentation. So these are the issues we're going to talk about today. Demonstration's fine, but as soon as you want to pull a header into those large plots and take some measurements and make some comparative statements, then you've entered the realm, to me, of comparative testing, and you need some sound science to back that up if you want to make statements. So a big issue is, will comparisons be made or not? No comparisons, you don't need stats. Okay, so the theory's nice, and there's been heaps of booklets on how to run on-farm trialling over the years. How do you get the most out of your trials? So define the comparisons to be made. So let's adopt a research question today of picking the highest yielding variety. Is variety A better than variety B? We want to run a trial and find that out. And the textbooks tell you, pick a uniform site and control or measure all other potential differences. That's really nice in theory, but never in my experience have I actually seen a uniform site. It will be different, and you know this from your yield maps. Industries know better than me, sitting in my office looking at data, that field variability is always going to be there. Okay? If it's not occurring through soil type, moisture, fertility differences, it sure will be there as soon as you start planting or spraying or harvesting or inducing some sort of management effects over your trial. So it's going to be the norm, not the exception. And there's a common perception that large plots are more representative. Okay, we'll just average over this and fix it all up and it'll go away. Hence my little ostrich. Don't bury your head in the sand and think that averaging is going to averaging over large areas is going to fix it up. It may help, it may not. It depends on how you're averaging. So the challenging question for today, I guess, are these large plots more representative or not? And you can interrupt me anytime you like. The take-home message, I guess, it's a bit like death and taxes, I guess. Field variability is always going to be there, okay? It will be the norm, not the exception. It's going to mask the true differences between the varieties. So if we're trying to make comparisons, we need to separate the field variability out from the actual differences. And hopefully I can convince you or demonstrate just by example today that large plots in these strip trials actually have much lower efficiency at answering your research question than small plot experimentation. So the title of the talk is Creating a Level Playing Field, Making Fair Comparisons in On-Farm Trialling. I've got a bit of analogy at half-time to help with that. But firstly, I'll show you a case study. Okay, please stop me at any time. I'm sure not everyone in the audience agrees with me about all of this, so I'd rather have challenges than blanket acceptance. The example's based on two different trial series. So these guys are over the other side of the country. It's probably safe to put their data up and make some observations about it. 2010-2011 wheat trials from the southeast wheat growing area in Western Australia, centred around Esperance. The yellow dots are trials grown by this SEPWA group, which are the Southeast Premium Wheat Growers Association. They're my large plot trials. I'll show you what they look like in a minute. There's 16 of those, and the green dots are the NVT trials, so national variety testing. Hopefully you're all familiar with these small plot replicated trials. You've seen them somewhere. Unfortunately, none of them are co-located, so the closest proximity is about 5 k's between these trials in some of the areas down here. But I think the aim of these SEPWA trials is we're not getting enough NVT in our own backyard. There's only 6 green dots around there, so they want to run varietal comparisons in large areas within their own area. This is what the NVT trials look like. So they have 6 ranges by 20-something rows. They're small plots, and I've just coloured the replicated things. So it's standard sort of stuff, white peg agronomy if you like. The plot size is 10 metres by 2 metres, and the whole trial is less than 300 square metres. Small plots. These SEPWA trials are strip trials, so they're large plots. A whole NVT trial will fit within one of those large plots, so the plot is over 3,000 square metres. They're 18 metres wide, which is probably a planter width or so, and they go for 180 metres long. They're huge. You can see that they've actually got some replication in here, which is good. So these blue strips, this is how it looks in the field, are all planted to some standard variety, H45 in this trial. The other lines that they're interested in comparing are in just single strips. So this is the sort of trial, I guess, we're comparing. And while I like to bag large plots, it's actually tied up with this level of replication or lack of replication as well. So there's 15 strips there. There's 1 control repeated 6 times. And this is what the yields look like, I guess, from that large trial. So it was running down the page before. Now we've got those 15 strips with the yield information across there. Average yield of 2.85 tonnes per hectare, but it ranges from 1.6 to 3.7 tonnes per hectare across that area. And you can see, if you look at that H45 control, that its yield actually ranges from 2.3 to 3.7 tonnes per hectare. So pick me the best variety. There was a really perceptive grower in the audience. I ran this at Dubbo last week, and both times people started to make some really neat observations from this with no statistical background whatsoever. And he said to me, you know, if this controls the highest here and these two are in between ones where it's lower here, you can't make anything out of that. What can you say? Nothing conclusive. The whole thing's driven by field variability, and the best attempt at estimating the field variability is that blue line. So all we can do to get rid of field variability is say, well, it looks a bit higher up this end and a bit lower down that end. So we estimate that, you know, we're decreasing, but it may kick and bump and dip through there. We haven't got many points to estimate what that field variability might be doing. So it's really difficult to draw conclusive information about varietal comparison when you've got that type of variability in the background. And I haven't picked this out as the worst exception. This is about average for those SEPWA trials. That there are some worse, there are some better.
Alison, what if you put a yield map over that? So if you had the yield map,
yep,
can you make some assessments out of that?
The yield map, and the issue to me, and I haven't sort of covered that today, yes, you can use the yield map. All the yield map will do is show you the variability within here, and if I don't run out of time at the end, we'll get to see all that does is average. All that does is give you this average figure. There's nothing you can do using a yield map within that big plot to get rid of field variability, because it's the differences between these that we need to get at, not within.
But isn't that more of an issue of site selection than it is of the actual trial itself?
Well, yes, but I would claim whether you're on the Darling Downs or west of Mungandai, there's no trial I've seen that has, well, and someone said, oh, well, I'm not surprised when you're in the southeast of Western Australia that you've got huge trend, but I can guarantee I've seen sites on the Darling Downs and the Liverpool Plains, which is...
I suppose my point is, have you looked at yield map data or MBD and biomass data, biomass images of that field prior to selecting that site? Because, like you say, it looks like a clear drop away as it goes across the paddock. And if you maybe turn it up and put it the other way, you might have gotten away from that variability.
Well, if you turn it up and put it the other way, then you're going to get your variability in your strips.
But it could be constant across the strip.
Well,
this is the whole...
No, I know. And the operative word there is it could be a constant. You know, there's an assumption. To me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, even if you had a yield map from last year, given the seasonal differences, how representative is that going to be of what's happening this year? Whether you're moisture limiting, moisture excess, your nutrients will interact with that.
The mistake they made was to put 6 controls in if they only had one.
Exactly. And if they only had one, you'd believe it and call it varietal difference.
Is a second.
And then what would you? And then would you happily pick this one as the best variety? Not because of what it is. You know, the issue we're trying to get at is we want to know if you're a good variety because of your genetics, not because of the good luck of where you were grown in the field. Yep.
If you're using a yield map, instead of working an average along that strip, can you not pick points along that strip of your yield map and say you've got certain points to make it more replicated?
That's... Hey? Yeah, the issue is about variability within a plot and variability between a plot. I was told not to do Stats 101 today, so I'm not allowed to mention a lot of those words, and we don't have time to cover all of those issues. But my short answer, and I'm happy to discuss at morning tea, is if all your yield map's doing is helping you sort out the differences within there, that should scare you, because your assumption is that the variability within each of these is uniform, and all your yield map can say, yes, that's right, or no, that's not. It doesn't help you fix up the difference that you've got a 3.7 to a 2.3 tonne per hectare difference between the same thing.
I tend to agree with this chap. I think if you've got 10 years of yield mapping,
Absolutely.
you can probably come up with a pretty consistent
Variation across the paddock.
Temporal variance.
temporal variance.
So how much G by E is there in that, scientists?
I mean, even if you had 10 years of yield mapping saying that you're getting a consistent yield across a certain area, depending on the size of the trial, you know, you can get a rain event that goes halfway across that field and stops. You know, a storm that doesn't quite cover all.
But that's all about paddock history and understanding the paddock history. I mean, generally, when you get 10 years of data averaged on top of each other, there's going to be variation, and whether some years some patches are going to be the high yielding area, and other years it's going to be the low yielding area because of high moisture, low moisture, whatever. But that variability generally stays fairly consistent, whether it's a good patch or a bad patch, and that's how you go selecting your sites to keep it more consistent to get away from this sort of thing.
Yeah.
The problem, as Alison said, is G by E, and the fact that genotypes perform differently in different parts of that yield map. So, you know, unless you've got an absolutely consistent year in, year out site, you know.
Well, and the other, I should have paid this grower to come along. I want to put him on my payroll. He was brilliant, this guy, last week, because he said, why use only one variety to replicate? Surely if you didn't use HR45 and you picked Gregory or something else that we all know and love, it would give you a different pattern of yield response there. So the point is, that's the G by E that Alan was talking about then. The trend is going to show up differently depending on what you grow on there. as well.
You'd be reducing your variation though if you did use that 10 years.
Yeah, and I agree, and maybe this is where we need to be. I take your point entirely. If we can get a handle on the background field variability, that's what's stuffing it up, and we need to get rid of that. If we could use that to get a handle on adjusting for field variability, and that's all we're trying to do here, get the best measure of that variability to adjust, because we need to get rid of it. So I think we need some, I mean, they're all really useful discussion points. Look out, here's David.
So Alison, if they'd been a bit more generous and put their control beside every treatment, so it had a left hand and a right hand, would that help them out? Would that help you to help them out?
The issue, I guess, and you know, it's confessions of a biometrician here as well. Part of the issue is not just the large plots, but it's the number of samples you've got across there to actually estimate that trend. So I'd suggest you're probably going up and down here a little bit. So the more observations you've got, the better. And we can discuss about, you know, the issues are how can we make this on-farm trialling better? And my solutions would be make the plots as small as you can to fit in with your planter and your header within reason. And there's some data I couldn't present today about trends that come from planting and harvesting. And the other thing is you need more replicates in these big trials due to the variability than you do in the small plot trials. It's as simple as that. So the answer to the analysis of all of those, now that we've been through the field variability thing, is let's look at, okay, I've been very generous. We want to detect a half a tonne per hectare difference between varieties. For wheat, that's about $50 a tonne. If we can't detect that level of difference, I'd suggest we should probably give up or change something. So the chance of detecting this half a tonne difference, our research question, difference between varieties, with a reasonable level of confidence, and pardon the stats jargon, I'll get rid of it in the next slide, but only 3 of those large strip trials could actually answer the research question that you were asking at the start, whereas 14 out of the 15 small plot trials could actually detect those levels of differences and better. So framing the answer in another way and bringing it back to the research question, it's a question of precision. Your target is your little bullseye. Can I answer the research question? Can I find a difference between varieties of half a tonne per hectare? 14 of the NVT small plot trials could do it, and the large strip trials are just less efficient, basically. You know, I'm not bagging them totally, I'm just comparing the efficiency that you're getting to be able to answer your research question. But who cares? So what? Do we really mind? Maybe we just need to realise we're working in a world where we have to accept lower confidence, and that's fine too. You might need to be really, really, really sure that it's that difference in yields due to varieties, not just field trend. And here's GRDC's investment question. There's a trade-off. Maybe you're happy to accept lower efficiency if it costs less, then you can do more and more of these large plot trials and beat it in that way. But I still think, sorry if you can't see it at the back, there is an opportunity to hone up and get these trials as good as you can. So there are some potential design advantages that we can implement to make these sorts of trials more efficient and just give you a better chance of answering the research question. The bigger question, and this one is harder to deal with, we need some pretty elegant stats and we haven't got time to go through it today. But the other issue is a question of accuracy, okay? If we do get an answer, are we answering the right question or is it the correct answer? And this is a huge issue. I'm going to try and demonstrate it with an analogy today rather than have the time to try and prove this to you, but I'm happy to discuss it later as well. So why did I call my title Creating a Level Playing Field? Here's some perfectly uniform fields, hopefully. Hopefully one of them interests you. Okay, and we watch it every week and do it every weekend. The aim of sport is to let the best team win. So perfectly uniform playing fields, or are they? We put one team up one end, one team down the other end. What are some of the potential things that might influence sporting fields? Hey, the idiot in the middle? Well, and worse still, in netball, we have two idiots and we put one up one end and one down the other end. So one team has one umpire in their attacking or defending end and one at the other. There might be blind linesmen up one end of the tennis court that keep calling your ball in or out, okay? What are some of the other things? Wind direction when you're kicking. I know it's probably all a bit artificial in these controlled environments. So are they level or are they not? Nearly. What do we do in sport? What are the rules of sport to try and even things up? What happens in a game of sport to try and make it more fair? Change ends. Why? That looks perfectly uniform to me. It's like your paddock. I can't see any differences. Why do you need to swap?
To take the argument out of it.
Exactly. And it just seems to me that, you know, footy we have two halves, netball 4 quarters, tennis they swap every 2 ends. Seems to me the more likely you are to get some influence from an unfair advantage, the more times you need to swap or repeat. Good. And the last thing they do, or the last nice analogy of sport, is what happens at the start of a game? Flip a coin. So, you know, I'm not allowed to mention randomisation, but what randomising... Randomising actually doesn't fix up that unfair advantage, does it? It doesn't matter which end you start, you're always going to be up one end one time, down one end the other time. All randomisation does, and again I got the perfect answer from the audience last week, it gives each team the opportunity of obtaining that unfair advantage. Okay? So, we haven't got sporting teams, we've got varieties. We put one up at each end of the field and we try and make a fair comparison. Maybe it's just a take-home principle for you to think about why we're so happy to accept and acknowledge repeats and swaps in sport and randomisation in sport, and yet we don't take it to our own backyard. Sports tab would have an absolute field day if we put one up one end of the field and one up the other end. You know, my analogy of large plots is just put them in one spot and let them play for long enough and everything else will average out. Okay, so here's our own backyard, our own level or unlevel playing field as the case may be. Back in the good old days of state departments, they used to let us run these uniformity trials when resources were perhaps a little more unlimited. Uniformity means it's all the same variety. So it's a barley trial, they're small plots. I've got 9 columns by 26 rows, I think. Remember, it's the same variety. So in this small area, you've got an average yield of 4.5 tonnes per hectare, and the yield range goes from 3 to 6. You know, biometricians get excited about that. It looks like it's roughly uniform. The mean's halfway through there somewhere. That's the sort of variability we even get in our small plot trials. So large plot, small plot, this is the background of what we're working with, a 3 tonne per hectare difference between those. What happens if we put a large plot over it? Let's average it away and assume it's all going to be okay. But what's happened is you get a mean of 4 tonnes per hectare, but don't forget you've actually averaged over 2.5 to 5 tonnes per hectare within that plot. The variability hasn't gone away, you've just mixed it up and it's all still there. And then the assumption is the same is as you do more and more large plots, that's the same principle's going to hold, and that's a huge assumption. So we can average over 4 large plots, have 4 big plots, and we see we've still got a range in yield. Not quite as bad as those other trials, but it's still there. And we've reduced the range of our plot yield, our plot means. The tricky part comes when you want to put varieties on there. So let's say we want to compare variety A and variety B in the presence of field trends. So there are our yields, if you can all see. Picture that in your head. And let's impose some differences. So let's put A here and B here. All I've done is average those figures. So the assumption is there's no difference between A and B. I haven't added any effects. I haven't said A is better than B. Let's just assume they're the same and see what answer we get. If you just average over those yields by putting them in those big adjacent areas, you observe a difference of ½ a tonne per hectare. But what's that due to? Yep, the fact of where they were grown, not what they actually yield. So that's the most dangerous thing to do, and this little chain up there reminds me that you can't separate your varietal effect from your field trend. Slightly better is to, at least randomise and repeat it somewhat. And I've done this in random ways. I haven't picked the worst or the best situation. So at least when you repeat it, you can actually get an average of 2 reps, and you see you're getting closer and closer to that difference. I know that's not conclusive and it's probably not convincing, but we all had time for a demo. So there's your take-home message. And there's some acknowledgements with people who provided the data, but we better stop there.
How do we get the best out of our research?
What do you... Off we go. Okay, I think with James's opening yesterday, it was a bit obvious that this is going to be an increasing trend into the future, that there's going to be more and more research moving to on-farm. Industry want this, they want to pose and answer their own research questions. So the motivation for me being here today is talking about how you can get the most out of on-farm trialling. A lot's been happening in the past and it's going to be increasing into the future. So if you have a clearly posed research question, I guess the aim is obvious, and Richard Daniels, who isn't here, had beautiful aims up at the start of his talk yesterday. Very meticulous, very organised person with clear aims as to what he wants out of his trials. And then the conduct of your trial will follow on nicely from that. How you need to run the trial depends really on what you're trying to achieve. Better get out of the road, sorry. So the distinction I guess I like to make is, are you trying to demonstrate a principle, or are you trying to make comparisons? There's a common preference for industry to see varieties side by side in large areas, probably for very good reasons. You might be able to tell me some. You like to make observations, plant with large equipment, harvest with large equipment, just see how these things grow in large areas, as opposed to perhaps a district.
Have you got time for seeing more?
Just a quick observation. I mean, you're talking about these big long strips and how it's only one yield measurement across that strip.
Yes.
I mean, most modern yield monitors are taking a reading every second, every 3 seconds as they go across that strip. You're basically getting all those little segments as you go across. It's only the data you wish to take out of that map. So if you're only taking the one average, of course you're going to have one average reading for a full long strip. But if you want to take out every 5 metres or every 10 metres or whatever else, this is the reading we got from that spatial distance.
Yep.
You can be as accurate or inaccurate as you like.
Yeah, but the point I was trying to make to Dave was the averaging is about, when you're making varietal comparisons, the averaging is about averaging that variety performance across the paddock, okay? When you've got it all in one big large plot, using a yield map within there doesn't help you separate out variety effects and field trend. It's that partitioning you need to get at. And you can't, if you've got one big area with one variety, it doesn't matter how many observations you have within, you can never work out whether it's due to variety or whether it's due to where it's grown. And that's a statistical concept we didn't really get a chance to explore too much.
One last question, then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Murray.
I suggested choices for courses. If you want to demonstrate really small differences, then you need small plots. If you want to demonstrate big principles, then large plots are excellent. They can see it, they can perceive it with their equipment. But if you want small differences, you've got to be small plots.
Yeah, and, you know, that's, I guess, it's perfectly articulated take-home message. All I was trying to demonstrate was what level of difference you can detect between them. And I still think, though, that we can be a bit more clever in these large strips as to how they're done.